Hello, welcome to MazArt Studio. Today we're going to be painting some sunflowers in a beautiful glass blue vase. I'm going to show you how to create the petals and to create the leaves and the foliage, but most of all I'm going to show you how to create shiny glass. The brushes we're using today, we'll be using a number 1 inch bristle brush. I've got a very soft goat's hair mop. And then here I've got a selection of flats. These are all the same brush, just a variety of different sizes. So a larger one, a medium one, and a smaller one. I'm also going to be using some clear painting medium. You could replace that with linseed oil or anything like that. Just a nice oil to help the paint flow. And the oil paints we're using today, I'm using titanium white, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, cadmium orange, alizarin crimson, sap green, burnt sienna. The 2 blues we're using today will be ultramarine blue and cerulean blue. I've got some violet and some ivory black. Now there seems a lot of colours on there today, but we only really use a small amount of each. The canvas that I'm using today is a panoramic canvas, and this is a 12 by 24 inch stretch canvas, and I've pre-prepared this already with black acrylic gesso. Acrylic gesso is like a primer, and so that's nice and ready for me to begin the painting. So the first thing I'm going to do is establish the tabletop. Now this is measured about 5 inches from the bottom of the canvas. So I'm going to take a white charcoal pencil and mark off 5 inches. And this is just to give me a guide for where the tabletop is. And of course I'm using a white pastel pencil so that I'm able to, show it on the black canvas. So it's just a rough guide. And then from there I'm going to take a template. Now if you're confident enough you can freehand your drawing, but if not you can always use a cardboard template like this. And I'm going to position that where I want to and very loosely sketching the placement of the vase. This is a lovely way of just cheating a little bit, because you're able to design your vase and then cut it out and get the correct shape. So again, I've just put a nice loose placement. Not worried about things like that because I can just rub that out. And then I'm very lightly going to sketch the placement of these sunflowers. So I'm going to have one there. I'm going to have one tipping to the side here. And then we'll have another one. We'll just have this one just tipping over the edge of the vase. I'm going to just lightly sketch in. I've got a leaf that's going to come down here. Very lightly sketching a placement of that. And then I've got one somewhere up here as well. So again, as far as drawing goes, you can see I've not done very much by way of drawing, so you need very little drawing skills. I'll just wipe that away. And that's enough of a sketch for me to begin the painting. I'm switching now to the 1 inch brush, and I'm going to go into a little bit of the clear oil painting medium and a small amount of the violet. Now you don't want too much medium because you will make this very wet and sticky, but what I'm actually going to do now is just dot this across, and I'm going to put on a nice purple background. Now this is a transparent paint, so initially, until I start adding the highlight colour, you're not going to see this too great on the camera. But I'm just tinting that background and then very lightly allowing it to fade off into the black. Don't forget to put something in between your flowers as well. There's not a lot of oil on this, you want very, very little oil. And I'm using a flip-flop crisscross stroke. And again, as I get further down here, I'm just going to allow that to fade off into the black. I'm going back into a little bit of that purple. And again, just taking it down to the bottom, to the tabletop. And again, just very lightly letting that feather off to the back, to the black area. And you can see how loose and unconcerned I am with trying to paint around the edges. I'm just keeping this nice and loose. Now I'm going to wipe the brush and paper towel. And I'm going to go into some titanium white. Just a little bit. Now if I use the white on its own, it's going to react with the purple and go very, very candy coloured. So I'm going to take a little touch of burnt sienna, and that's to just dull the colour down. I'm looking for a sort of a dull lavender colour. I've not got a lot of paint on the brush, and if I tap that through I can get a nice even distribution of paint. Now the light is coming from the upper right, so I'm going to begin in that area. Now I'll test that and can see already it's still very bright and candy coloured, and I want something that's just a little bit duller. So I'm going to go back into that burnt sienna. An earth tone will always dull down the colour that's underneath. So if you ever need to dull a colour down, you can either use a complementary colour or you can use an earth tone, and in this case I'm using a burnt sienna. Now I'm just applying the paint, I'm not trying to blend it at the same time, I'm just going to get the colour in there, and I want to leave pockets of light and dark. I don't want it all to be one mass of colour and for it to look like a cloud that's just plonked there. I want the areas of light and dark. Now I'll keep the lighter area up at the top, and you can see I'm working right into the flowers, not too worrying about the edging. And as I come further down the canvas, I'm really lightening the pressure and allowing that to just fade. I want a gradual transition, and just a touch of the burnt sienna just to knock down some of that colour and keep it a little bit of a dull purple or a dull lavender colour. Now I've applied the paint. Let's just take that a little bit further over. And you can see I'm not worrying about the edges. As long as I can see where the vase is, I'm not worrying too much at all. And then again, very lightly, very little pressure now, and just allow that so you've got a little hint of that colour just showing through, but allowing it then to fade into the black. Now it's applied, it looks very scruffy at this point, so I'm going to clean the brush. Now whenever you clean the brush, you always must make sure that you take the excess thinners off there. You don't want to be taking the thinner up to the canvas because it will actually lift the paint. So now that it's nice and dry, it becomes a nice blending brush. So I'm going to go back into the area that I've just worked, starting at the top and working my way down. It's the same movement, a figure of 8 or a crisscross stroke, very light, slightly lighter pressure than when I applied the paint. And you can see now it slowly starts to soften and blend out any harsh brush strokes. You can keep wiping in between if you're picking up a lot of that colour. I'm very conscious that as I come further down, I'm going to keep the bright up at the top. As I come further down, I really want to soften it and let it fade into that black area. And once you're happy, again, I'm looking for movement. I don't want a solid mass of colour. I want lights and darks and different and a variety of tones within this background, and that just keeps it a little bit more interesting. But I do want it to be nice and soft so that it's not competing with the flowers. We want them to be the centre stage and the background just to be there. Okay, so we're now going to begin the tabletop, and I'm using the large flat brush and I'm going into some yellow ochre. Now this time I'm not going to be adding any medium, and the reason for that is it gives you just that little bit more control. When I come to blend, I want to be able to blend this quite easily, and if you make this too wet with medium, it becomes very slippy. So I'm beginning with the yellow ochre, and I'm trying to establish the light colours on the tabletop. Now I do want some light behind the vase as well, so I'm going to put a little slither of that yellow ochre at the back there, and this helps give the illusion of a little bit of depth. And I'll also bring a little hint of that at the front here. And again, another quite a wide area, and this is where the light is going to be hitting the tabletop. And you see, I'm going to switch to some burnt sienna, and this is going to be the middle tone of the table. And I'm going to get that in there. And just a little bit of this coming down underneath. And again, just letting that fade to black. Now this is just the blocking in stage, and it looks very, very rough to begin with. And again, I'll just wipe the brush. And this time I'm going to go into some burnt sienna and some of the violet. And this is for a really nice, dark, rich brown. And this is the vase putting a cast shadow over onto the table. Now that's probably not dark enough, so I'm going to go add a little bit more of that purple in there. Purple is a really good shadow colour. And once I've got the tones in, I'll just bring that a little bit underneath the vase as well. As the vase is sitting down on the table, it would be casting a shadow. And then I'm just going to clean the brush. And then I'm going to use this brush now as a blender. Just used a nice back and forth stroke to soften these tones. So by using the brush nice and clean and going back and forth like this, I'm able to get a really nice soft blend between the colours. I'm using quite a light pressure, and I'm wiping in between so that the colours don't keep transferring. And you'll notice I'm not worrying about the edge of the vase. Just really at this stage looking to soften the tones between one colour and the next. Now once I'm happy that I've got a good blend, I'm going to clean the brush again. Again, always making sure you dry it nice and thoroughly. And what I want here is I want this to just sort of dissolve into the background, so you're not quite sure where the background ends and the tabletop begins. So to do that, a nice clean brush, and you're positioning your brush so you're half on the background and half on the tabletop. And if I just go back and forth very softly, I can get a really nice soft edge. And if you compare that to this one here, you'll see how much nicer and softer that looks. Again, I don't want anything hard that draws the eye away from the flowers. Again, just back and forth. And if I do it this way, you can't really contaminate because your colours always stay in the right position. And get a nice soft transition. Now I want to give the illusion of a roll top, so I'm going to go into some titanium white. I'm going to to put a nice lighter band right across. And again, I'm just going to wipe the brush and use this back and forth stroke to just soften that. And that just gives me a lighter edge right on the tip of the table. Now you can enhance that by going into, I'll clean the brush, get rid of the white first, but if I go into a little bit of dark, which I'll use the burnt sienna and some of the violet, get a nice strong dark, and I can just put a little bit of a darker area right underneath this edge. And again, I'm just going to go back and forth just to soften that. And hopefully you can see we've got the illusion of the rolling tabletop. Just very lightly soften. Now all my colours are in place, and I want to give the illusion of a wood grain effect. And the way to do that is I'm going to borrow paint from the lights to the darks and vice versa. I'm using the brush nice and clean, nice and dry. And this time I'm going to paint with it right on the edge. So I'm using the chiselled edge of the brush. And I'm going to begin to create little ellipses. And I'll borrow the light, take it into the dark. Again, I'm not worrying about the edge of the vase. And this just gives you a little bit of extra detail in your tabletop. I'll bring a little bit of that down here as well. Again, just borrow paint. And this is just to add that little extra detail onto your table and make it look like it's a wooden table. I'm going to switch now to the large mop. Now this is a very soft goat's hair mop, and what I want to do now is soften those strokes so they don't look like they're stuck on there. Very lightly soften those into the paint. I'm using this brush very, very lightly. If you use it too heavily, it does look like next door's cat's walked all over your painting. So do be careful. And that just helps soften everything. I want to keep that background nice and soft, and that just softens everything into the painting. So I'm starting with a medium flat brush, and we're going to begin blocking in the vase. I'm going to start with some cerulean blue. And initially, I just want to get where the lighter areas are on the vase. So I'm just going to block in the shape. And then just literally fill that in. Again, I'm working very, very dry with no medium. Like with the tabletop, it's a lot easier for blending if you work a little bit drier and you don't have the medium under there. Now there's light passing through the vase. This is the front part and this is the back end of the vase. Again, just blocking in, just getting a nice shape and then blocking that in. So I've got a nice coverage on there. And there's some light passing through here as well. Again, I'm just getting that shape in there to begin with. Now once I've done that, I'm now going to switch to ultramarine blue. fill in the rest of the vase. Again, think about this as just blocking in. If you've got any flowers tipping over, you just want to avoid that area. So I'm just filling that in now. Always think about doing your blocking in and then adding your detail over the top. Again, working very, very dry with no medium. I've got a good coverage of paint on here, so I'm not skimping, I'm not trying to spread that paint too thinly. I want to make sure that I can get a good coverage of the canvas underneath. And you do have to work, you'll feel it pulling a little bit, the temptation to add a drop of medium to help it flow a bit better, but don't do that if you can avoid it, because it does make it a little bit harder for blending the next stages if your paint is too sloppy. Again, just blocking in. So once I've got the vase blocked in, I'm just going to wipe the brush, and like we did with the vase, I'm going to use the brush to blend. And I'm not looking to blend everything, I'm looking where the two colours join. And by blending and mixing, I'm going to create another colour, a kind of an in-between. We've got a dark, we've got a highlight colour, and we're going to create an in-between colour. So I'm just looking to break those edges up and get a nice soft transition. But I still want to maintain that lovely light area in the middle. So you can see by going crisscross like this, I'm breaking up that area. And this is why you don't want to be adding medium, because it becomes very, very sloppy and very difficult to work with. Once I've got enough of the blending done, I'm then going to use a clean brush. I've not actually cleaned it in the thinner, but I've just give it a good wiping. And I'm using the brush now to contour the shape and manipulate the paint that's on there. And this will help now create the shape of the vase. By going up and down now. This side I'm going over to the left. As I come to the middle, it's straight up and down. And then as we come over to the right, I'll curve the strokes to the right. And this will give you the shape and the contour of the vase. So I'm using a nice clean brush. And once I'm happy with the bulk of the blending, I'm going to switch to the large soft mop. I'm very lightly going to blend everything we've just done, and that gets rid of and eliminates all your harsher brush strokes. Again, remember to use the mop very, very lightly. Now we will be adding a little bit more detail to this vase, but we need to put the stems and the leaves and things in there first. I'm beginning to block in these stems. I'm going to go into some sap green. I'm using the medium flat brush. Little drop of oil this time, just to help the paint flow. Now I want a dark green, so I'm going to add a little bit of the ultramarine blue to get a nice dark green. And I'm going to block in the stems. Again, the centre of this one, this flower's facing goes straight on. So I'm going to come down and press and take that down and then lift off. Now I will wipe in between because I'll be picking up a lot of that blue from underneath. Now this one, we have got just blocking, we can see the back end of this flower. So I'm going to bring that across and then drop that down, and it's good to overlap these stems as well. And then this one, we're seeing this slightly on the side, so the centre is going to be somewhere over there, and then I'll bring that out and drop that down. Of course, we've got a few leaves, so again I'm going to bring the stem up and down. And I'm going to very lightly, I've lost the sketch from earlier, so I'll very lightly sketch that in again. And we've got a leaf up here as well. Again, I've lost the sketch a little, but that's not a problem. I'll just lightly sketch that in, and then I'll bring the stem down into there. Now I do want to highlight these, so I'm going to use a little bit of cadmium yellow. I've only wiped the brush, so there's some green on there as well. And I'm just going to put in the suggestion, test that colour. It's probably a little strong, so I'm just wiping a little bit of that excess paint off. And I'm just putting a hint of a highlight on these. Just a little bit of that colour down into what's going to be the water area. Keeping it nice and soft. Now we can finish the vase. Now we've got the stems all in place, we can actually finish the vase off. So I'm going to switch now to the mop and decide where the water line is going to sit. I'm going to have it around about here. So everywhere underneath, I just want to blur out. Very lightly soften out those stems. Maybe go just across slightly. And this will give the illusion that the stems are underwater. So I'm going to switch now back to the medium flat, and I'm going to start getting the water line in. A little bit of the cerulean blue and a small touch of the white. So I'm going to focus now, this is an ellipse shape, so I'm going to focus now on getting the water lines down here. So I'll come across and get that water. Just keep wiping the brush, you will be picking a lot of that colour up. So I'm going to highlight this water a little bit, just a hint of that coming through the back. And just a little bit of white right at the front, just to suggest a stronger highlight. Now while I've got that colour on the brush, I'm also going to drop down and get the illusion of the inside of the vase. Get that shape in there. Again, I'm very lightly, and I'm just softening that out at the same time. And that gives the illusion that the vase has got a little bit of depth. Now I'm going to go into some ultramarine blue. And I'm going to get that stronger, darker shape at the bottom. That gives it that nice solid feel. And at the top here we've got like a rim on the vase, so I'm just going to put that in. And that wants highlighting a little bit of the cerulean. Again, I'll just clean that dark blue colour off. And we'll go into the cerulean blue and we'll put on a highlight and allow that to very lightly fade off. You can add a slightly stronger highlight to the centre with a little bit of extra white. Now we'll start the shine on the vase. And for that I'm going to use some titanium white. And again, be aware of the contour of the vase. So if you use the brush in a flat overhand motion and then just drag that down, and then I'm going to use the mop and very lightly soften that and blend that out. Again, notice how I'm following the contour of the vase, and then right in that centre I'm just going to redo that highlight, that slightly stronger highlight right in the middle to give it a little bit of extra shine. And that's very, very thick paint. And if you want to, you can put a little bit of extra highlight right up on those rim. Possibly a little bit more as the light's passing through the water, maybe just catching a little bit of extra highlight. And that's enough detail on the vase. We're now going to block in the leaves. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of the oil and into some sap green and a little bit of the violet, the purple. And I'm going to block these in very much like we did before. I want it quite dark around the where the flower will be sitting on the top. It's nice and dark around there. And then as I come a little bit away, I'm going to wipe the brush and just go into just the sap green. Again, just use that little bit of oil. And this becomes like a middle tone. Again, this is just blocking in. We're not actually shaping the leaves. And then into some of the cadmium yellow. A little bit of that green as well. And this becomes the highlighted area. So I've got 3 tones, 1, 2 and 3, slightly darker tone. So I've just blocked in that leaf. And I'm going to do exactly the same with the other one. So into the oil and into the darker green, which is the sap green and the violet. A nice strong dark colour. And I will block the shadowed side in here. And I'm just getting that basic shape in there. And wiping the brush in between and into the sap green on its own. Again, just that little bit of oil. And then finally into the cadmium yellow. And we'll get the highlighted part of the leaf on. So once I've got everything in place, all the lights and shadows in place, I'm going to begin shaping the leaves. So I've cleaned the brush and I'm going to go a little bit more of the oil and into some cadmium yellow. Now you want to try to load just once. So I'm going into the yellow and I'm going to start in the highlighted section. and all the strokes are going to be directed to this stem. And you notice I come a little bit outside from the drawing, and it's like an S shape. So I'm on the chiseled edge, press and lift off back to the chiseled edge. Now if I load just that once, as the paint picks up the other colours, it'll get dirty, which means I'll get a natural shadow taking place. So again, I'm on the chiseled edge and a stroke to that centre point. And you can see this S stroke that I'm using. Again, the leaf is just gradually getting a little bit darker. And so you can form a natural shadow. I feel like this is probably a little bit too light, so I'm just going to knock that down ever so slightly by adding a touch of green and just restroking it. This is the beauty of oils, you can actually just change things as you go. Now I'm going to do the same with the other leaf. I'm just wiping the brush, so I'm going into a little drop of oil and into the yellow. And again, I'll start in the highlighted area. All my strokes are directed to the base of the stem. Hopefully you can see the really strong S curve that's forming. Now if you use a bigger brush, you'll get a wider stroke, so it all depends on the look that you're going for, which size brush you will use. And I'll just bring the stem right up through the centre, and so you get a natural highlighting taking place. So I'm switching now to the medium brush, and again into some oil, and I'm going to start blocking in the flowers. So I'm going into some cadmium yellow. Again, this time, whenever you do these flowers, the wet on wet technique, you do want your underpainting to be just a little bit wet. And that's so that your highlights later on can be just that little bit drier. Now, I've got this centre area here. This is going to be where the stamens are. And I'm very loosely just pulling in right to that centre. This is going to be my highlighted area. I'm going to add a little bit of white to that, just to bring it up a little bit lighter. And again, you'll see it's a little bit sloppy, a little bit wetter, because the highlights will go on drier. And I want you to notice the ragged edges. We want to keep this nice and loose. Now as I come further down, I'm going to switch into some yellow ochre, and I'll start getting the middle tones in. Again, keeping this nice and loose. And if you pick up some of the background colour, that's all okay, it really doesn't matter. Into the yellow ochre again. And then as I come a bit further down, so again we've got our three tones, we've got our highlight colour, we've got our middle tone, and then I'll switch and add a little bit of the cadmium orange to the yellow ochre, again with some oil, and I'll get a slightly darker tone at the bottom. Again, nice loose strokes. Now I'm going to block all the three flowers in exactly the same way. This one's on a slight angle, so we've got more of an ellipse shape rather than a full circle like we've got with that one. So again, back to the yellow. A little bit of white in that, keep it nice and light. And some oil. And I'll start getting in the lighter areas first. Very, very loose. And then into yellow ochre for the mid-tones. And then into the orange and the yellow ochre for a slightly darker colour. Again, it's picked up a little bit of this blue, but that's all okay. It'll all be fine and give the illusion of transparency to the petals. On the side, we're actually seeing the back side of this flower, so I'll just very lightly brush in the 3 tones. We've got a highlight colour, yellow ochre for the mid-tone. Now I'm not worrying about this leaf. If I have to restroke over that later, then that's what I'll do. And then into cadmium orange and yellow ochre to get these darker tones at the back. Now, just for a little bit of extra, I'm going to add a little bit more white to this one at the top. It needs to be just a little bit lighter. And also for a little extra flavour, I'm going to go into some alizarin crimson. And I'm going to throw in just hints of that colour, which will just get picked up when you're creating your petals. Nice and loose. And this is just for a little extra detail and extra colour. Especially around the edges, it's quite nice to have it slightly darker in that centre area. Just feather that out and fan that out. So this is just the blocking in stage, and they look a little bit like a donut at this point. But main thing is you've got ragged edges and it's nice and loose. So I'm switching to the smaller detail brush, and I'm going to go into some burnt sienna and a little bit of that violet for a nice dark brown. And we're going to get this centre area in. Now the centre's nice and black, so I just want to keep that nice and dark in that centre. Let the black canvas do the work for me there. So I'm just filling this in. Again, we're just blocking this in, and what I'm going to do is just lightly fuzz the edges so you can't quite see where the petals start, and we've got a nice soft edge rather than something too hard. And while I've got that colour on my brush, I'm going to do the same with this one. Again, keeping that centre nice and black. If you do lose that, you can always go in with a little bit of black and pop that in. Again, I'll just feather these edges so that they stay nice and soft. And then I'm going to switch to some yellow ochre. I've just wiped the brush, so I'm going into the yellow ochre, just the end of the brush, and I'm going to tap on the stamens and the detail. Just very, very lightly. Just start to add that little detail on there. And we'll do the same with the other one. I may just highlight that a little bit more so it's yellow ochre and some white. And where it's maybe just that little bit lighter, we can pop on a few extra brighter areas. And then let it fade down to a slightly duller tone. And again, if you lose the shape of the dark centre, you can always go into some ivory black and just pop that shape right back in there to tidy up. So we're now ready to start adding the petals. So we're now going to begin to create the petals, and I'm switching initially to the medium flat brush. I'm going to go into some titanium white. Now this time, remember, we've got oil already on the surface of the canvas, so I don't want to add too much, but I do want it to have a little bit of a a slide, so I want to add just a teeny drop of oil, and then I'll brush the brush across the paint, and I'm looking for no resistance. I want it to just glide nice and smoothly. Now the key to doing these petals is all about the stroke. So initially I'm going to start in the lightest area, and ideally I just want to load the wands like we did with the leaves. We want it to stay light and then gradually get a natural shadow as the flower turns. Now this is all about the brush stroke. You will start on the chiseled edge, come out flat, and then lift up back onto that chiseled edge. Now I'm going to do that again, and this is okay if it picks up some of the background and you get natural shadows occurring. So it's chiseled edge, flat, back to chiseled edge. I've just loaded that once. Again, I'm going to restroke this leaf, but for now I'll leave it as it stands. So that's our first layer. Now before I go any further, I'm going to actually put the calyx in for this stem at the back. We're seeing the back end of this. So again, I'm going to go into some white, a little bit of green on the brush. And I'm going to start exactly the same way into the, so don't forget the paint will always be picking up the colours from underneath. So I'm going to come on, press and lift off. And what happens is you will create a natural shadow colour. Again, I'll just tidy up the outside edges of this. Bring that in line with the stem. And so you've got this natural calyx effect. Now I'm going to clean the brush and I'm going to add another layer in, slightly smaller. I'm going to go into some titanium white. Again, no oil, or very, very little oil, and I'll add another layer of petals in between. Now before I go any further, I'm just going to put that leaf back in place. You can decide at any point whether the flower stays on top or the leaf stays on top. In this case, I'm going to put the leaf back on top. So I would just restroke it, go back to my S strokes, and that pushes this flower behind. Do the same here. And that pushes the flower behind the leaf. Now we'll move, I'm going to switch to a slightly bigger brush, the larger flat brush. And we're going to begin on the larger flower. In fact, I'll start on this medium-sized flower. So into titanium white, a little bit of the yellow in there. And again, a slightly grain of rice of oil, just so that there's no resistance on the brush. And I'm going to begin with the outer petals. So it's onto the chiseled edge of the brush, flatten, lift back up onto the chisel. So we're starting in this big one after all. Now I'm going around this almost like a clock face, and bear in mind that my strokes will keep changing with the angle of each petal. So it's nice and loose, and I've just loaded that once because I want to create that natural shadow effect. Now as I get to the bottom here, I'm going to reload, but I'm going to go back to the top. So it's back into that titanium white. Now I'm grooming the brush. I want to always make sure that I've got a nice sharp chiseled edge to this brush, which is all key for this technique. Again, just a drop of oil so that there's no resistance underneath the brush. So again, starting in the lighter area. So it's chiseled edge, press quite firmly, then lightly back to chiseled edge. And it just takes a little bit of practice. Again, notice that I'm changing the angle. Now I'm going to reload. I want to get rid of some of these outside edges, so I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush, again into the titanium white and a little grain of the oil, and I'm going to start popping in a couple of smaller ones in between, and that helps just sort of neaten your outside edges. This is a nice loose flower, and we've got to keep all our strokes nice and loose. And again, I'm going to put another layer like we did here. I'm going to switch and put another layer. Now I'm going to go back to the slightly bigger brush and into the white. Little drop of the oil just to help it flow and glide. And we'll pop in another layer, a little bit smaller. I'm going to reload again. As the paint becomes really dirty, I'll just reload and go back into the lighter area. So as you twist your wrist, you'll get all these lovely shapes taking place. And again, you could come in and put even more layers in and make this as full as you need to. I'm going to move down now and do the one on its side. Again, back into white. And we'll get this chiseled edge, flat, chiseled edge. As your brush starts to lose its shape, you're always better sort of reloading and reshaping that brush to form that chiseled edge. But whenever you reload and you're going into a light, remember to always go into your lighter area and work your way down, and that way you'll create this natural highlighting effect. Again, if you want to throw any extra little ones in where you've got some ragged edges. And again, I'm going to just I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush so that I can get another layer on the inside. Again, just a little drop of that oil, and we'll pop in another layer, smaller petals. A little bit more of that white. So all the colours from underneath are just being picked up and redistributed as you stroke the petals in. So you could add loads of these layers and just really have some fun with this. Now I'm going to just show one that's just tipping over. I'm going to go to this larger painting, and what I'm doing is just simply getting the flat of the brush, bringing it across and going to a point. And then if I just take the edge of this brush and just bring the corner in there, it looks as though one's just tipping over. And that's just adding just an extra little bit of that detail. Okay.